In the rolling mists of ancient Norfolk, where the river Tass threads between green fields and reedy marshes, stood Venta Icenorum, the market town and heart of the Iceni tribe. Imagine a morning by the river in the first centuries after Rome's conquest. The settlement is alive with clatter, chatter, and the earthy perfume of livestock, pottery, and freshly baked bread. Horses nibble on dew-wet grass, watched by children whose faces are streaked with dirt and laughter. This was daily life for the Iceni at Venta Icenorum, a people long rooted in these lowlands. The Iceni had occupied these lands since before the shadow of Rome fell upon Britain. They traced descent from Iron Age Britons who had built great roundhouses and eked a fierce independence from earth and animal for centuries. Their ancestry was carried in their bronze armourings and in the famous Netisham hoard, jewellery masterpieces of spiralled gold and silver. These treasures glimmered on the necks and arms of Iceni women and chieftains alike. The mighty Queen Boudica may herself have worn such finery before her fateful revolt. Though Rome's legions crushed the Iceni in the bitter aftermath of Boudica's rebellion in 60 and 61 AD, the tribe endured, battered, but not obliterated. Venta Icenorum developed in the changing world that emerged after the Boudican revolt. It was a symbol of the ruling Roman power, but one that was inhabited by the Iceni, and that reflected their interests and aspirations as well as those of Rome. The town, name and all, bore witness to its inhabitants' history. The Iceni's memory lived on in the very map of Roman power. Let me introduce William Bowden, Professor of Roman Archaeology at the University of Nottingham, who leads the Caister Roman project.
Will, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to the site.
A pleasure to have you.
And it is quite an extensive operation, isn't it? So where are we standing if we go back almost 2,000 years ago?
Well, almost 2,000 years ago, we would have been just inside the boundaries of the Roman town of Venta Icenorum we're talking about the 2nd century AD, really. The name means the market of the Iceni. And when you visit the Roman town today, which stands just to the south of Norwich, you'll see an area, a walled area. The city walls are perhaps the most visible part of the site, but what you see is actually only quite a small part of the Roman town. And so where we are now is we're about sort of 300 metres to the northeast of the site that people visit as Caister Roman town, but actually, although it feels like we're in a random field, we're actually still within the boundaries of the town as it was in the 2nd century.
And you're certainly still digging some amazing things up. I mean, how long have you been doing archaeological work here? How long has the Caister Roman project been going on?
Well, I started working here in 2006, and we started doing geophysical survey at the main town site and followed that up with seasons of excavation from about 2009 onwards. But we always wanted to have it I started it as a university project, but I always wanted to have a really strong community element to what we were doing here. So we set up the charity Caister Roman project in 2009 and used that to support community and volunteer activity in archaeology. And now it's very much been taken over by the community. The community manage the project, they do most of the work, and so our members really lead the activity here.
But this is also an amazing site, isn't it? Because sometimes we get into this bipolar world of either a site is Iron Age, pre-Roman, or it's Roman in Britain. But this site allows you to show how much more permeable it was. You get to see the Iron Age and Roman stuff together at this site.
That's right, and I think that's one of the key things that we have at this site. That kind of binary opposition between the Romans and native Iron Age people is, I think, a big problem actually in how people still conceptualize the Roman period in Britain. Because I think when people think about the Romans, they think about a bunch of soldiers coming over from Italy, doing Roman stuff, and then and everyone else goes away somewhere.
Making their roads and aqueducts.
Making roads and aqueducts, drinking wine, wearing togas or whatever. And actually, as we know, most of the people living in Britain at that time are the descendants of the Iron Age population. You've perhaps got an immigrant population of maybe 5%, perhaps a little higher in cities, but the people living in this area are still the Iceni.
So my next question was going to be, how do we pronounce the name? But you said it there, so it's Iceni, not Iceni, is it?
Yeah, that's right. It always used to be Boudica and the
Yes.
Iceni, but the correct pronunciation, according to the people who study ancient Celtic languages, is Boudica and the Iceni. Boadicea arrives effectively from a medieval typo, a slight miscopying of Tacitus, and that's where Boadicea comes from, and the name becomes tremendously popular particularly from the Victorian period. But it's Boudica and the Iceni.
So if we focus on the Iceni before the Roman takeover, let's say before the Boudican revolt first of all, this always feels a tricky question to ask, but do we have any idea when the people here start labelling themselves as Iceni, if they even ever did so?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and obviously all the names that we have for peoples in pre-Roman Britain come from Roman sources, and so we've got Roman sources, particularly Caesar,
Julius Caesar, yes.
Talking about, describing the sort of ethnic makeup, if you like, of Britain, and they do it from a very particular point of view. So we certainly have coins in the very late Iron Age. So after the period of Caesar's of contact with the Romans, we have coins with the term Ecen on, which people tend to think it probably is referring to the Iceni.
Wow.
So, but these sorts of labels, it's a really interesting aspect. When labels applied by others almost start to become also modes of self-identification. People take on those labels as well. So I think paradoxically, it may have been the Romans christening or sort of labeling this region as the Iceni that perhaps may have given people more of a sense of a cohesive identity that they might not have had before that. So I do think it's a two-way process.
And just a bit of context, so Julius Caesar, 55, 54 BC, his two invasions of Britain and that early contact. And has the archaeology here revealed much about the nature of the Iceni settlement that was here before the Romans take over? Do we know much about that?
In this particular site, we don't actually have much in the way of actual settlement evidence. What we have is a sort of halo, if you like, around the site of Iron Age pottery, metalwork, and coins. Generally, in the territory of the Iceni, which seems to be current Norfolk and bits of Cambridgeshire and Suffolk, the general settlement pattern seems to be fairly small enclosed settlements with small groups of round houses. We don't really have the sense of large central places that we have at places like St Albans, Colchester, Silchester, these big so-called oppida, where they're almost sort of proto-towns. I mean, people argue about that sort of terminology, but certainly there are groups coalescing and craft specializations and large systems of defences. There's not so much of that in the territory of the Iceni. There's some interesting, quite large monuments, but the jury is still out really on whether the equivalents to those sorts of oppida really existed in this area.
So should we be thinking that most Iceni groups were living in smallish settlements, with a few roundhouses, they're farmers, they're living off the land, maybe extended family groups as well?
Yeah, I think that's right. That's certainly what the sort of limited evidence of Iceni settlement is telling us. So I think we can envisage families, perhaps extended kin groups, coming together, perhaps in times of conflict. I mean, one of the best sources for the social structure of the Iceni is the coin evidence. The Iceni are making coins, really in the sort of first century BC into the first century AD. So, quite late in their history. But what we're seeing is that there are several different centres minting coins at the same time. So the idea of a sort of single king or single queen of the Iceni is not reflected in the coin evidence. What we've probably got are a range of different groups, and as I say, at least 4 or 5 of them are minting coins at any one time. So we can imagine perhaps several important groups or leaders.
But do we think, because I immediately think of the Boudican revolt and the figure of Boudica and her husband Prasutagus, or Prasutagus? Or how do you say?
Prasutagus, I think,
Prasutagus,
okay. As you like, really.
But the Romans labelled him almost as like the king. So do we get? Could there potentially have been a hierarchy of chieftains as well, or any idea around that?
There could have been. We certainly don't see that We certainly don't see that really in the archaeology. And I think the importance of Prasutagus and Boudica is perhaps more to do with the Roman narrative of the revolt rather than the actual situation as it might have been on the ground.
They're the big figures for the great narrative story of how they overcome this massive
Absolutely,
revolt. That's
yes.
the thinking, is it? I must also ask, before we go post-Boudica Iceni, another amazing part of the Iceni story, which is the beautiful treasures, the art that has survived from Iceni lands, like those beautiful talks, isn't it, and other works of art. Talk to us about these beautiful works of Iceni art, because they are stunning.
Yeah, I mean, one of the amazing things that we do get in this region are some of the extraordinary treasures, particularly the Snettisham talks, which are these wonderful, huge gold objects.
They're very heavy, aren't they?
They're very, very heavy. There's a lot of metal in those, and they're being put into the ground for particular, possibly ritual reasons. But it's something that I think is a characteristic of the Iceni. Probably power and status is reflected in portable wealth, and also probably in things like livestock, large herds, and this sort of thing. And I think that's something that we actually see carrying on into the Roman period. I think part of how the Iceni view wealth and status is reflected subsequently in how they respond to the new material coming in from the rest of the Roman world.
Can we say that they are a warrior society, a warrior culture?
I think I would say no more so than any other Iron Age people. I mean, they certainly revolt first against Rome, apparently, on the grounds their weapons are removed, and this is the first revolt.
So this is pre-Boudica,
This is
another one.
This is pre-Boudica, and we know that it's a very equine focused society. There's a lot of horses. A lot of the metalwork is about decorated, horse decoration, and also chariot fitments. So the idea of the Iceni and chariots is at least reflected to some extent in the archaeology.
And you see that elsewhere as well, don't
Yeah.
you? The recently unearthed Melzenby hoard and the amount of beautiful chariot gear there. I'd also like to ask a bit about Iceni death and burial and religion, because I know in other Iron Age groups, a lot of the information about the people themselves comes from burials and how they were buried and so on. Do we know much about that in regards to the Iceni?
Yeah, it's a real problem in that we have very little in the way of burial from the Iron Age. I mean, the numbers might have gone up now, but I think for the entirety of the sort of 800-year history of Iron Age Norfolk, we've probably got around 100 individuals. So what's happening is that they are certainly disposing of the dead in a way that is not leaving much in the way of archaeological traces, whether that is excarnation, so sort of laying the bodies out to nature or to wild animals. We don't really know, but whatever they're doing, we're not really finding it.
So we get to the big year of 60 or 61, is it
60, 61, it's debated. The debate sort of ranges around how long the events depicted in the revolt should have taken, how long it gets people to go from one part of the country to another. So the revolt sort of gets rather telescoped in the sources, but some people would argue it goes on longer.
And can you explain briefly, we've done whole podcast episodes on Boudica's revolt and the battles, but why this revolt is so important and intertwined with the story of the Iceni and what happens to them?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time we see the Iceni through the lens of the Boudican revolt. This famous episode when the Iceni under Boudica revolt against Rome, burning Colchester, London, St Albans, before apparently being defeated at an unknown location.
The so-called Watling Street.
The so-called Battle of Watling Street, which is a whole other wormhole that we probably won't go down right now.
But what are the consequences of the failed revolt? Because isn't it, I know Romans do exaggerate it in the sources, over 100,000 people, presumably lots from the area of the Iceni. What are the consequences for the Iceni people being the losers of this revolt?
Yeah, this is a really tricky question. We have the sources which tell us of huge casualty numbers. I would say that is a very, very typical thing of Roman battle descriptions. The victory against overwhelming odds with very minimal casualties on the Roman side and huge casualties.
We're so
on
great.
It's a really it's a standard part of what Roman audiences would expect from a battle narrative. We also have Tacitus telling us that, following the revolt, there was retribution against the Iceni. They were, the harried with fire and sword, and that the Iceni suffered from famine because they had failed to plant their crops before the revolt. Now, I would say that is none of this is really reflected archaeologically. The aftermath of the revolt, the effect of the revolt, I would go so far as to say if we didn't have those textual sources, we would not see the effect of the revolt in the territory of the Iceni. It is not archaeologically visible.
So it is not showing at a site like this that there was severe stress on crops or famine or anything at that time. That's amazing.
No, there's very little in the way of a Roman military presence in the territory of the Iceni after the revolt. And in terms of material culture, the sorts of things that the Iceni are wearing and where they are, we see enormous continuity. There is no sign of a great sort of discontinuity in the area following the revolt.
So what does the archaeology show? What happens in this area of Britain in those decades after the Boudican revolt? What seems to happen to the Iceni?
Well, as far as we can tell, they carry on, and a lot of the things that we see in the pre-Roman period, so an interest in portable material culture, a lack of interest in imported materials from other parts of the Roman world. We see that carrying on into the Roman period. Before the revolt, the Iceni are picking and choosing the aspects of the Roman world that they're interested in. So coins coming from the Roman world, Absolutely, the Iceni will have those.
Wine as
And
well, presumably?
wine less so.
Okay.
The Iceni aren't really into. We don't get much in the way of consumption of wine or olive oil actually at this site. And whereas other places like the Oppida at St Albans, Colchester, Silchester, yeah, those are people who are sort of really fully engaging with the Roman world as it exists in Gaul, so importing wine, shiny red pottery, this sort of thing. That kind of engagement with the Roman world we don't really see in the pre-Roman period, and so in many ways it's not surprising that we don't get very much of it in the post-revolt period. I mean, at Venter Icenorum, so the town, which is the only major town in the territory of the Iceni, and it seems to be their sort of regional capital, founded in the post-revolt period, principally for the collection of tax, because that's what the Romans were ultimately interested in. That town is quite small. It's one of the smallest regional capitals in Roman Britain. Its forum is one of the smallest in Roman Britain. And for a long time it was thought that this is because the Iceni are impoverished after the Boudican revolt. They have an impoverished local elite who cannot afford to put up big buildings and this sort of thing. Whereas when we sort of get under the surface of that, to my mind, it's actually not that they couldn't afford it, but they simply weren't very interested in doing those sorts of, in creating that sort of urban environment.
Do the Romans still see this part of Britain as very much on the periphery? It's in the east, far northeast, in East Anglia. Do you think there's just not much interest in building a lot of Roman towns in the area, even after the Boudican revolt?
It's an interesting aspect, this idea of it being on the edge, in the east, a long way away, and I think to some extent that's a modern conception of Norfolk, and for a long time I sort of fell into that trap. I think of thinking about what's going on in Norfolk, thinking about what's going on at Venter in relation to what's going on in the southeast in London and Colchester. But actually I think for much of the Roman period the important focus for Venter is looking eastwards towards the North Sea, towards the Wash, towards maritime connections, ultimately going across in the late Roman period, certainly going across to the Rhineland and up to the northern frontiers.
Well, yes, so what is your research here? What has it revealed actually about, the topography, the climate that was this area of Britain back in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries AD?
Certainly the landscape around here was quite different. The riverine system of Norfolk was much more open. We have this so-called Great Estuary, whereby the sea, I suppose, the Yarmouth sandbar didn't exist, so Great Yarmouth is not there, and you could sail large vessels sort of much further into Norfolk. That silts up really in the post-Roman period and becomes peat deposits, which are then subsequently quarried out, and that's what creates the Norfolk Broads. So the Norfolk Broads are a sort of relic of this estuary system, but largely a result of peat quarrying. But we are in an area which is much more open to the sea. Our work here suggests that you certainly couldn't sail your ocean-going vessel as far as Venter Icenorum. It's on the river, it's on the River Taz, but probably goods are being transshipped further upriver and then possibly moved down to Caister on small flat-bottomed vessels. But it's definitely, I think, a landscape which is looking out towards the sea, and we certainly really see that in the late Roman period.
Does that? Because I was going to ask if that feels unusual then as a position for the Romans to build their only kind of Roman-looking town in this region, that it is not right next to a navigable river, which normally seems one of the biggest priorities on their list when looking for a new place to found a town.
Yeah, I think it's perhaps the fundamental thing about Venter Icenorum is it's in the wrong place. A more obvious place for a town is where present-day Norwich sits. It does have better riverine communications, and that's almost certainly why Caestus stops, or Venter Icenorum stops being a political centre in the mid-Saxon period, and it's why the Roman town is now, an open field with sheep in it, which gives us the chance to investigate it as we can. But the reason for the town being here is, I think, something that we've puzzled over since the project started, and I think it really reflects what was here before. We're now fairly certain that there is an Iron Age cult centre, not underneath the present Roman town, but at a large temple site fairly close by. And I think that is why the town is founded here, because it was an important place for the Iceni.
So the Romans are basically, even though they're not building towns everywhere, they're just doing it here, but they're building it in a place that they know is important to the Iceni people. And so is it effectively the Romans showing their overlordship, their supremacy, that they're putting their mark, they're stamping their authority on this important area of the Iceni?
Potentially. I'm always a little bit wary of the Roman boot founding towns as a sort of ideological statement. I mean, certainly that happened, but I think the fact that the town is founded adjacent to this cult site rather than on top of it, and the major cult site clearly continues in the Roman period, is monumentalized in the Roman period, and becomes clearly continues as a major cult center in the Roman period. So I think it is less of the Roman boot than perhaps a pragmatic acknowledgement that this is a place of power for the Iceni, and so it's a sensible place to have a centre.
So Iceni beliefs, the archaeology suggests from that site nearby, certainly do seem to continue into the Roman period, do they?
Absolutely, and I think there's no reason to imagine that they shouldn't. Generally, the Romans weren't that bothered about what belief systems were adopted, and could be most of these belief systems, gods, goddesses, are highly localized and could be easily absorbed into the Roman pantheon.
Syncretism, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. And we certainly have a lot of Roman gods and goddesses at this site. We've got certainly evidence of Venus, of Mercury, of Neptune, all being worshipped or venerated at Venter Icenorum.
So whichever god or goddess was worshipped at that site before the Romans come, the Romans could have said, that deity seems very similar to Venus or Mercury. So do you get it like you have in, isn't it Bath, where they have Aquae Sulis and a mixture of Minerva and Sulis? Do you think it could have been a similar case here? A certain Roman deity is basically likened, is joined to the local deity that was worshipped here?
Yeah, we could have a syncretic situation, or we could have multiple deities worshipped at the same site. It's very hard to tell, and annoyingly, because we have no good stone round here, we don't get any inscriptions, so we have nothing to really tell us about that kind of behaviour beyond the material culture.
And in regard to the layout of the town itself, the archaeological work that you've done over the years, is it reflective of, you mentioned there's a forum right in the centre, so is it very much the traditional layout of a Roman town from anywhere in the empire?
To some extent, and I think perhaps superficially it has that aspect. It's got a gridded street system. The evidence that we have suggests that street system develops over time rather than being sort of laid out in one big act of Roman planning. And we have the sorts of buildings that we expect in towns in Roman Britain. We have the forum, temples, a bathhouse. Generally in Roman Britain, there's not actually much adoption of some of the key aspects of urbanism. In the Mediterranean, you'll get lots of local worthies sort of erecting inscriptions and statues and making donations to their local town. And we have tons of epigraphic evidence from Gaul, but also more particularly from Italy, of this sort of behaviour. That never really takes off in Roman Britain. There's very far less of that kind of behaviour going on in Britain. And so I think the reason that Venter Icenorum has is quite a small civic centre is partly that kind of lack of interest in this kind of civic behaviour. Conversely, the major temple sites that is always seems to be this focus of the Iceni, that does get really monumentalised in the 2nd century particularly. So while we have one of the smallest forum in Roman Britain, we have, I think, the 2nd largest Romano-Celtic temple. So it's not that the Iceni perhaps didn't have the resources, but that's where they were spending it, not on building a big forum.
And do we have at all any inscriptions survive from the temple site that might mention a person who was an Iceni, maybe making a donation or an offering at the temple, or anything like that, which might give us more names of Iceni people during this Roman period?
The only really good textual text we have is a curse tablet or defixio that comes from the river, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely my favourite thing from the site, because it really humanises, sort of brings everything down to a human level. And it's the dedicant, it's I think a chap called something like Nasenius, or Nays, it's on the defixio. And he's had a series of items stolen from him. It includes 10 pewter vessels, a headdress, and which is quite an interesting idea in itself, and a pair of leggings. And he says, Neptune, bring me the blood of the culprit and I'll give you the leggings. And so I love this, because the idea that, what's going to swing it for an all-powerful oceanic deity is a pair of second-hand leggings from Norfolk. It just brings everything to a really, really human level. But this is, it's one of the only, I think this is the only sort of voice. I think the only example of a sort of voice of a local person that we have from this period.
So far. Because it sounds like, are there still quite a few, or quite a lot of unanswered questions that you'd love to find the answer to through the archaeology being done here and in future years as well, that might reveal more about the nature of the Iceni relationship with Rome, and how long the whole identity of someone being an Iceni endures during the Roman period?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that could still come up. We certainly know that the people living here in the Roman period, there was a great deal of literacy. We find a lot of writing equipment, and to some extent that's expected. It's a centre of administration, it's a centre of record keeping, of tax collection. But we know that all sorts of people are writing. We get scratched graffiti on pots, and not only on pots that we're finding in the ground, but clearly there is graffiti being made by the potters themselves. And so I think the more we have of that level of literacy, the more we might see voices of local people. But how long an Iceni identity lasts is a really interesting question. The town is still Venter Icenorum in the certainly in the 4th century. It's recorded as such in the Antonine itineraries, which is a kind of guide to how you move around the Roman Empire. And so the town certainly still has that name. Whether that identity is still present, clearly by the 4th century everyone is Roman in one sense or another. But people can have multiple identities. People can be Roman, but people can still be Iceni. And I think certainly as we enter into this sort of challenging period of the late 4th and 5th century, those sorts of local identities quite often re-emerge.
They could have a resurgence.
They have a resurgence in times of stress, and so I see no reason why an Iceni identity could not be persisting in that period.
So you could actually see a revival of people claiming their Iceni ancestry in the 5th century when all the troubles come. And I guess also in this part of the world where you probably get more the threat of Saxons or Franks or whoever coming from across the seas. You've got the so-called shore fort at Birr Castle not too far away, don't you? With those threats, maybe it could have, and I know we're in a big period of speculation now, a big topic of speculation, but that could have elevated the possibilities of people really stretching back to the Iceni identity of old.
I think that's right, and certainly here we have very strong evidence of an early, let's say Anglo-Saxon presence. We've got very early cemeteries here dating to the 5th century, which are full of new material culture, and we see new settlement developing here. Who those people are is a really big question, but it's certainly something that we do see in Roman Britain as a whole in this period. We see new regional identities emerging. So in the southwest, people are choosing, I think, to become Roman in a way that they probably actually weren't during the Roman period. There's a newly emergent Roman identity. But in other parts of the country, we're going to see other different local identities emerging.
Well, Will, it's such a pleasure to be here and to see how the archaeology is adding more to, the story of the Iceni. And I guess it's pushing aside this old idea that the Iceni, they disappear once Boudica is defeated. They don't. They're still here. And it's remarkable to see all this new evidence emerging.
Absolutely. I think if there's one thing that we can achieve here is to try and move the Iceni away from the Boudican revolt narrative, because the survival of that narrative is a peculiar combination of circumstances, and the utility of Boudica as a woman leader to those Roman writers in the narrative that they want to create.
Even though it wasn't unusual for women to be powerful in Iron Age Britain?
No, we've got several examples, but we know that there are probably quite a lot of revolts in Roman Britain, but this is the one that is particularly attractive to Roman sources, and it's also particularly attractive to the people who are looking at Roman sources later on. So we have our Boudica tinted spectacles, if you like, that we tend to look at the Iceni through, and so I'm hoping that, fun as the Boudican revolt is as a hook for people, I think it's important that the entire sort of 800, 1,000 year history of this region is not looked at solely through the window of that particular year.
Will, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
The work of William and the Caister Roman project has already revealed so much about the Iceni, showing how their story is so much more than just Boudica. And it's exciting to think about what new finds they'll unearth in the future. Now, with all the archaeology around me, before I left the dig, I couldn't resist having a look at some of their latest discoveries, fresh out of the ground. To talk me through them, I sat down with the project's chairman, Andy Woodman. We'll put a link in the description where you can see photos of the objects.
Andy,
Yes.
It is great to have you on the podcast today.
Very welcome, thank you.
You've
And thanks
brought-
for coming to see us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. We've had a chat with Will already
Yes, you have.
about the Iceni, and now you've brought us out a select choice,
A choice
selection of
selection of
objects.
sexy bits.
Yes.
Yes, I have.
So what have we got? Let's get straight into it. What's this first object we've
let's go early.
got? Right.
This early object is an early Saxon barbed and tanged arrowhead.
Early Saxon, did you say?
No, I didn't. I said early Bronze Age.
Early Bronze Age.
Your
There we
ears
go.
are just going funny, Tristan. And you can see it's translucent. It's made
Okay.
out of fine flint. So this is a very fine flake,
Yes.
which has then been shaped using an antler tool to get the tangs. And obviously the point about a barbed and tanged arrowhead is once it goes in, it stays in.
So that's showing that people were here long before mentions of the
Yeah.
Iceni by the Romans.
Absolutely.
That they're here.
There are Bronze Age barrows and stuff in the vicinity, and there's a henge about 2 miles away. So around the lowland rivers, we're going to be having prehistoric people. I think there are other people who are going through the earlier ages of the Stone Age, the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, around rivers. And this site is near the confluence of rivers, so that's often a significant piece of work. But that's a lovely piece of flint.
bit, isn't it?
It's the nicest I've ever seen come out of the ground. And I'm going to put it back in the bag before I get told off.
And next, so we have got, it's a coin.
Next we've got is a coin, and we find a fair amount of coins here. All of our meadows and fields have been very thoroughly metal detected, but metal detection only goes to a certain level.
Nice.
And even so, we still find we get nighthawked. But the local Norfolk policeman, who is the nighthawk policeman, is also one of our members. So that helps. And he also makes reproduction Roman pottery, which is a bizarre combination. But once the turf is off and we get down below the range of a metal detector, then we start to find a significant amount of coins. Most of the coins we find are middle fourth century, Constantinian.
Constantine, okay, right, yeah.
Around about the 330 to 350. Tiny coins, easy to lose, probably of relatively low value, probably dating to the time when the town was resurgent, possibly due to the export of grain and wool to the Rhine frontier, which was under stress at that time from the barbarians across the river. What's interesting about this coin is that it's silver plated.
Okay.
It's the first one that we're aware of that isn't solid gold or solid silver. The Iceni weren't minting coins weren't striking coins that much. Coinage is obviously comes in through contact with Roman economies across the Channel, and they won't be used as a coin economy as such. It would have had a specific value. But this one is different because it's a copper alloy coin with thin sheets of silver on either side before it's struck.
So is it almost in this time where a coin's worth is the value of like its metal composition, is this almost a rip-off coin or a con?
Well, that's the question. We haven't found one like it before, so our coin expert will be digging into his comparatives to find out. But it could be a hooky coin, or it could be that they were struck to give to people for commemorative reasons rather than for, coinage value. So, but an interesting one nonetheless.
And do we know what it shows on it? What are the images on it?
On the reverse, it has a typically Iron Age collection of stylised horses.
That's classic.
So it's a classic zoomorphic art on the reverse side. So a lovely piece.
And potentially, I guess a theorisation, isn't it? But if there was a time of difficulty for these people before the Romans take full control of this region, maybe this coin is evidence of it. But as you say, more evidence needs to be done on it. But it's still interesting to theorise.
It's still interesting because it's different.
Yes.
And as you know, with all these things, there are hundreds, tens of thousands of pieces of pottery and brickwork, etc. But it's when you find something different, and it makes you think.
Well, shall we now turn our attention to this object right here? It's a small face.
It's a small face.
It's about the size of, it's about 5 centimetres tall.
I'd say it's a couple of 5 centimetres.
3, 4, 5
it's
centimetres.
Slightly hollowed at the back.
Right.
It's of a bearded and hirsute man with possibly braided hair, or
oh yes,
it looks a tad like the Emperor Hadrian.
I was
in some
literally
ways.
Thinking that it looks like the hairstyle and with the beard of Hadrian.
Doesn't it just? He's lost a bit of his nose, so he may have had a more Roman nose before he was in the plough soil for 2,000 years. But wouldn't we all, frankly? And it's either going to be on a building, although it's quite small if you want to see it from a long distance, or it's going to be on a large vessel, a large urn or something. Right. It's been suggested it might be one of the Four Winds, but not seen one before. It's made out of pretty horrid clay and fired. It's been fired in a kiln, but it's not.
But to survive like that, and the details still survive. The clear features of a face, the ear, the
Absolutely.
Beard, the nose, the eyes, the hair, and everything.
They're all there. So again, we're going to have to look into some parallels for that. But that's a beautiful piece.
And do we think that would date to the Roman period?
I think, given its context, I think we're talking early 2nd century.
And certainly with the
Something like
hairstyle and everything.
Certainly with the hairstyle, and that looks kind of Hadrianic.
It
in
looks
terms of
quite Roman, yes,
yeah,
indeed.
it absolutely does.
Well, look, what have we got next?
What have we got next? From a similar period, we've got this delightful little, what's called a fly brooch.
Okay, that's-
And it looks just like a housefly.
Like a housefly. So I've never ever heard of an ancient decoration in the form of a fly.
Me neither. Yeah. And it's dead cute. You know, you can imagine 2,000 years ago, when it hasn't been in the dirt for the last 2,000 years, that's going to be shiny and polished. One of my guys has looked into parallels and found some pictures of some similar fly brooches with some enamel blobs on it colouring. This one doesn't look like it has, because had it been, there would have been some little recesses, I suspect, in there. Yeah.
And to describe it, so you can see two clear, very thin wings.
Very thin wings.
Looks like a Y-shaped tail right at the back.
Yes, and a sort of pointed mouth with almost with a proboscis.
Yes.
Is that the right word? Proboscis? I forget my...
Well, it's either a beak or a proboscis, isn't
Yeah.
it? But like it's, yeah.
And on the back there would have been a very thin pin joining it together. But clearly this is what, a centimetre or more, centimetre and a half in total size. So that's not going to hold a piece of clothing together. This is bling, this is decoration, this is something. Whether it's associated, as someone might have suggested, with Mercury, I don't know. Or whether it's someone who liked houseflies. I don't.
The person who liked houseflies.
Exactly.
Icenorum.
Yeah, we get a lot of horseflies around here, so maybe it's to ward off horseflies. I don't know, but that's a very sweet little thing.
That really is, isn't it? And I guess it's also, I mean, the skill and the detail to craft that, the metalworking, which you get associated with the Iceni quite a lot, and evidently continues.
We do, and we know that just to the other side of that field, there's evidence of brooch making in the pre-Boudican period. And one of the reasons we're in this field, because we know there are kilns and furnaces in here. We just haven't landed on top of one just yet.
Not just yet.
Not just yet,
indeed.
but we will. And we're going to, at some point in the future, we're going to reinvestigate the area that Surgeon Commander Mann discovered the brooch making. It's a scheduled area now. But that's a sweetie.
Arrowhead, coin, head and brooch, fly brooch.
Yeah.
What's next?
We'll do a couple more, I think. We've got loads and loads of coins, as I said, from the middle 4th century, as lots of Roman sites do.
The age of Constantine. And
yeah,
so on,
the age of Constantine, where there's rampant inflation, where huge coin loss, also an area of great uncertainty with the Constantinian change and the British emperor that declared himself and roamed around. But I've chosen some things which kind of illustrate what it might be like to have a Roman-influenced town in the middle of a rural population.
Okay.
Not near the rest of Roman society, right? We don't have a whole series of villas with mosaics and dancing nymphs, right? We don't. The biggest town nearer to here is Colchester. Yet we have Roman British temples that would have been the largest building this side of Colchester.
Yes, so the majority of people here, they're Iron Age people, still in their round
Still
houses
Celtic.
and so on, exactly the same.
Absolutely, and the elite would become more Romanised than the non-elite. But I agree with you, it's the same population that was here through the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and would have been here throughout until the post-Roman period.
Interesting.
And they probably still lived in the same way they did before, but they would gradually adopt some Roman techniques like wheel-based pottery, better kilns, and the elite would start acquiring some nice Roman bling, and we tend to find this.
So what is this pointy object we have here?
This pointy object is a very pretty stylus. It's just missing the point at the end there, and probably, and at the top there might have been a flat piece just to smooth out any mistakes in the wax. But it's got some beautiful decoration at the top there.
So that's almost like the equivalent of a rubber on a pencil today.
I think so. I think this is the Mont Blanc of the early Roman period.
So it's got right to the, so this once again, this is about, trying to think of a 30 centimetre ruler. It's about 10 centimetres maybe?
I think that's about 10 centimetres.
10
It's about the size of a trowel.
And right at the top, maybe half a centimetre, you have a little bit of decoration. The rest is just kind of black in colour.
It's black but shiny.
Black, shiny.
It's been polished.
And then the decoration is horizontal bands and then a few diagonal
Vertical and
lines as
diagonal,
well.
yeah, sort of trellis shape. But
So what do we know about it? What do we think then?
Well, we think it's.
Do we think the material was local, that kind of blackish material?
It's hard to say. It's originally thought to be a copper alloy, and I think it is rather than a piece of jet or something. I think it'd be hard to get a piece of jet that fine. So I think it's that, and then coloured. And I think it's metal, but it's a lovely little piece. And what it illustrates clearly is literacy in a totally non-literate population in a region of the country that's non-literate. We've got the introduction of literacy.
And do we think that would be centred on the Roman towns?
I think
within the wall, there'd be more people.
I think within the wall, you've got Roman administrators.
Yeah.
I think the purpose of the town is to control the market, to control import and export, and to control taxation. And somebody is keeping a score, and I think that's what that illustrates.
And so do we think that some members of the local population, they would have adapted to Roman lifestyle? Some local Iron Age people, some Iceni people would be living within the walls of Venta Icenorum, and they would have learned things like writing.
We would think that at its peak you've got 2,000 or 3,000 people here, that's a large number at a time when the population of the whole island was 2 million?
Yes.
Something like that. So there is a concentration, and wealth concentrates, and work opportunities concentrate. So that's typically why I think we'll see that.
We have one more object to have a look at, don't we?
We have one more in typical show and tell tradition, and this talks a little bit about what people do in their spare time.
Amazing.
This is a polished bone gaming counter. Right, it's about 1.5 centimetres in diameter, and it's been inscribed with perfect concentric circles. It's very tactile.
So it's a clear gaming piece, isn't it?
Yeah.
That design.
It has no other purpose. It's
Right.
if you've got some kind of a board with counters on that you're moving around.
This is a gaming counter.
That's a
as you
gaming
say.
counter, and someone has made that specifically for that game.
I love it when archaeologists find these sorts of artifacts, because they do give you an insight into the downtime almost of
It's people
these
stuff,
people.
isn't
It's
it?
people stuff, exactly. I mean, you get the beautiful heads of maybe an emperor or a god or so on, but to get something like that, what they did together around a fire or a hearth or something like that, they're really special, those.
I think so. That's what makes it special. In and amongst the mountains of pottery and brickwork and bones and everything else, yeah.
Do we think that is made out of bone? I mean, what types of bone would they have been using?
It's hard to say. It's been polished, and this came out of the ground 2 hours ago.
2 hours ago. So we are on the scene. This is breaking news.
Absolutely on the scene. So you'll appreciate there's not been an awful lot of work done on it. But we will clearly look into it, and we'll look into parallels around the rest of Britain.
But were there particular animals whose bones were used more than others at this site?
I'm not sure. Antler gets used for quite sweet stuff.
Yeah.
But I think this is probably...
Sheep, maybe? Sheep?
Yeah, sheep is the most predominant bone, so that suggests it's the most predominant bone. Cow bones are bigger, so perhaps they're more resilient to being worked. That looks like it's been put on a lathe, doesn't it? It's that precise. That looks like there's been lathe worked. You wouldn't put a brittle bone on there.
Well, Andy, it's such a pleasure to have you on, especially as you've got a strong connection
Well,
to
I
history
certainly
here.
do, yes.
And the many years you've been working here, are there any particular artefacts that you've discovered over the years that are, really close to your heart that you'd like to mention?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. I think finding the temple complex, just across the road there,
big building, yeah.
which is the second largest Romano-British temple in the country, and the largest one, only one that's larger than this, is at Silchester, which is an order of magnitude bigger. And Silchester is built on top of Civitas. It's a section of main thoroughfares and roads, etc. And when we investigated it, we found actually there were 2 phases. And below the very first phase was a beautiful gold coin, a Trinovantian gold coin, so from the next tribe along. That temple was demolished, and a much bigger, blingier temple was put on its place. And underneath the foundations of that replacement temple were a line of 9 coins, each of different emperors, from Nero to Hadrian.
Wow.
Now that doesn't sound like an accident.
Just continuous, is it?
Yeah, it's just one after. It's got every single emperor except for Titus. Right, and he was quite transient anyway. He wasn't there for long. So someone has made a point that says we've taken down the old temple, which was probably put on top of a sacred tree or something sacred to the local population, and we're replacing it with this bigger, better temple, but we don't want to anger anyone, so we're going to redeposit this line of coins, each for a different emperor. Unfortunately, one is smaller than 10, and 10 constitutes a hoard, and we'd have to go through a whole faff if you got a hoard. So it's not a faff. We don't have to go through that.
Well, Andy, you're a great character, and just looking at these particular artifacts, it just shows the great, the variety of objects that have been uncovered here, these digs over the years. And I mean, for you in particular, I know you'll be here many more years in the future too, but
I suspect so.
Is there any dream object you'd love to find, Iceni object that you'd like to find in the ground one day?
Well, we've not found any real evidence of military stuff here. Not that I'm desperately looking to do that. I cut my teeth on the Roman wall in the north, so you get enough stuff up there of military stuff. But it would be interesting to find something to prove it or otherwise. And I think it's just to understand that cultural transition from the Iron Age into a Romanised society, and at the other end to understand the transition from a Roman administration to whatever that post-Roman age was, and how it evolved. And we know that there's some early Saxon settlement around here, and there's an early Saxon graveyard cemetery over there. And we know that by the Middle Saxon period they've moved to the modern beginning of Norwich. But that's, I think, what we'd like to know some more about. That transition at each end of the Roman period. There's loads of places you can find about peak Roman period. We're never going to find the dancing nymphs. We're never going to find a full...
Are you telling me have you given up hope of finding a complete mosaic of an elaborate Greek myth?
I think so. We found a lot of tessellated floors, and we found what we thought was a...
Are you sure the Pompeii of Norfolk is not beneath these fields?
It's hard to say, isn't it? I mean, the Pompeii of Norfolk, we found lots of aqueducts. Well, what we found is a series of iron collars.
Lovely.
Because the wooden was already rotted away. But yeah, I'd like to understand more about that, and I'd like to transform our organisation to something which is more self-sustaining. We've been funded by donations and funds for the last period of time, and that way of working is dying now. There aren't charities giving out money in the same way as there were. So we have to transform ourselves into something which is more sustaining, and that's going to be a challenge to us. And as the next chairman, it's going to fall on me somehow.
Well, Andy, hopefully you'll get much more interest in this now with this episode about the Iceni.
I'm hoping so, and if anyone is interested in joining us, then they can apply for membership through our website, which is caseToRomanProject.org.
Case to Roman Project. Well, there we go. Andy, thank you so much once again for showing me these artefacts and giving me a part of your time to talk all about it.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I've had the most wonderful day here at Caister St Edmunds, or Venter Icenorum if you prefer. My thanks to the project team, to Andy Woodman and Professor William Bowden at Nottingham University for inviting us today. The teams here, including multiple volunteers, are doing incredible work piecing together fragments of history, finding the lost stories that lie hidden beneath the soil for nearly 2,000 years, from gaming pieces to that amazing Roman stylus. You can find out more about the Caister Roman Project at their website, which has detailed maps of the site and photographs of key finds. We've put the link in the show notes. I'll also put images of the objects we looked at on my social media page on my Instagram, so you can look at that as well. Now, if you want to hear more about the Iceni and Boudica, well, we have some great episodes in our Ancients archive. You'll find links to them too in the show notes of this episode. This is one of my favourite parts of the job, getting right up close to history, touching the same items, families and even warriors of the Iceni would have touched almost 2,000 years ago. And to actually come here to the excavation itself, to do an Ancients recording on site. It's such a pleasure to do, and I really do hope you've enjoyed the episode. I hope the Iceni and Boudica herself will be happy to know that they haven't been forgotten. This has been the Ancients from History Hit. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you in the next episode.